At the outbreak of World War II, No.3 Squadron RAAF would be sent to the Middle East, tasked with supporting the 6th Division of the Australian Army, and would spend the entire war in the Mediterranean theatre, becoming part of the Allies' Desert Air Force, supporting the 8th Army. It would go on to be the highest-scoring RAAF fighter squadron during the war. On the 24th of July 1940, 3 squadrons, 21 officers, and 271 airmen of other ranks departed from Fremantle on board the Orontes, heading toward the Middle East. It would be the first Australian squadron to leave for the front. The squadron arrived at Tufik in the Middle East on the 23rd of August 1940, under the command of squadron leader Ian McLaughlin. They moved first to Ismailia, then later to Helwan near Cairo. The squadron was attached to the RAF headquarters in the Middle East, and by mid-September, stationed near Cairo, they were equipped with 2 flights of Gloster Gladiators and 1 flight of Lysanders. These outdated aircraft would have to serve the squadron until Hurricanes were made available. Gladiators were the last and the best of the British biplane fighters. They were descendants of Sopwith Pups, Camels and SE-5As, all of which performed effectively during the closing years of the Great War. The Gladiators were robust and highly manoeuvrable, to which 3 Squadron took full advantage. On the 19th of November 1940, 18 Italian Fiat CR-42s attacked 4 3 Squadron Gladiators carrying out a tactical reconnaissance mission. The squadron lost its first pilot, squadron leader Peter Heath, during the ensuing dogfight. The Australians claimed 3 enemy aircraft destroyed and another 3 probably downed. The Italians, however, claimed they suffered no loss and 6 Gladiators shot down and 2 probables. A curious statistic given there were only 4 Gladiators in the fight. During the early days of December, the squadron carried out strafing and dive bombing attacks in the Safafi area and continuous offensive patrols over Sidi Barrani and Halfaya, before moving to a location near Sollum, on the Egyptian border. Between the 3rd and the 5th of January 1941, the battle for Bardia raged, and 3 Squadron helped the 13th Corps win this first big victory of British General Archibald Wavell's Libyan campaign by spotting for the artillery and efficiently conducting its army cooperation functions. Over 40,000 prisoners, 400 guns, 130 tanks and 700 motor trucks were captured during this campaign. The now disorganised Italian army was on the run, chased by the Allies, including 3 Squadron, who moved to Gambit about 32 miles from Tobruk on the 8th of that month. From there, many artillery reconnaissances of the Tobruk defences were made during the build-up and the actual taking of Tobruk by the Allied forces on the 21st of January 1941, a milestone in the Western Desert War because of its strategic shipping value. On this same day, the first of the squadron's Hawker Hurricanes was released from a base maintenance depot to the squadron's new advanced landing ground at Bir Hachaim. Flying Officer Gordon Steege was one of the first to fly the squadron's Hurricanes. The squadron would cover Tamimi to Martuba, while forward troops were fighting in the Derna Machili areas of Cyrenaica. The Australian 6th Division captured Derna on the 30th of January 1941, and that same day, Wing Commander McLaughlin received the Distinguished Flying Cross. By early February, a few of the long-awaited Hurricanes were operating in the squadron. The Italians were in full retreat and were pushed back to Benghazi, where they surrendered on the 7th of February. The squadron relocated forward to Benina, about 12 miles from Benghazi. Squadron leader Peter Jeffrey was appointed the new commanding officer on the 13th of February 1941. The squadron operated from Benina for a little over 6 weeks, and during this time met the strength of the Luftwaffe for the first time. On the 15th of February, Flying Officer J.H. Saunders was the first in the squadron to shoot down a German aircraft, a Junkers Ju-88, in his new Hurricane. In North Africa, 3 Squadron were up against a variety of enemy aircraft at this time. The main Italian fighter was the Fiat CR-42, the best of a family of agile fighters that could fly at almost 300 miles per hour at 30,000 feet for over 450 miles. The Luftwaffe had the Ju-88, a fast light bomber with superior armament, and the famous Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers were also active in the theatre. The Stuka was a precise bomber but relatively slow, with a maximum airspeed of 232 miles per hour. It was this slow speed that helped 3 Squadron bring down 8 of the 12 Stukas they surprised on the 18th of February 1941, near Agadarbiya. The Luftwaffe also had the Messerschmitt Bf-110 fighter bomber operating in the Western Desert. With its twin 1,270 horsepower Daimler-Benz liquid-cooled and inverted V12 engines, it was capable of flying at a maximum 349 miles per hour, which was almost as fast as Britain's fastest fighter, the Spitfire, and certainly faster than the 310 miles per hour of the Hurricane. As a long-range fighter, with its 2 20mm cannon and 4 7.9mm machine guns built into the nose, and a single 7.9mm machine gun operated by the Observer, it was a formidable opponent. Nevertheless, the metal-framed Hurricane was a robust fighter that could outclimb even the Spitfire, reaching 1,500 feet in under a minute. It had a service ceiling of 34,000 feet and a 460-mile range, armed with 8 303 Browning machine guns, which could lay out 200 bullets a second onto a target. On the 31st of March 1941, within 2 weeks of arriving in Africa with his specially trained Desert Armoured Division known as the Afrika Korps, Rommel launched a surprise attack on the Allied positions at El Agheila, ignoring advice from the German General Staff to refrain from making any attack. The Allied troops could not hold against Rommel's fresh new forces and withdrew to Martuba. Aerial combat was hectic over the following weeks as 3 Squadron protected the retreating Allied army from heavy German air attack. Almost every day in early April, as the ground crew was retreating by road, the squadron's pilots were busy shooting down Stukas, which were continuously striking the retreating British ground forces. On a single day, the squadron brought down no less than 10 Stukas without loss to the squadron.
No, the day before we vacated Agadarbiya, we were subjected to an air raid. We got a message from base to expect an attack at 11 o'clock. The bombers escorted by fighters. We got this message early in the morning. And 3 Squadron was to fly up and give us fighter cover. Well, we hardly believed the accuracy of this sort of intelligence, but it turned out to be accurate as events turned out. 3 Squadron had flown from Benina, which is 100 miles to our north, took up position in the sun a bit before 11 o'clock, flew round in the sun invisibly, and at about 11:15 overcame 2 Messerschmitt 110s, and 3 Squadron descended on those and shot down one. It went into the earth and exploded about a mile away from us, and the other was hotly pursued. It pushed its throttle through the gate and took off at great speed and outdistanced the pursuing Hurricane. And then 3 Squadron had virtually been flying for an hour and a half or so and still had 100 miles to return, and they have limited fuel supply. So it formed up and flew on back. And a few of us took a vehicle and went over to where this 110 had hit the earth, and before we quite got there, overcame a flight of bombers. And we turned to go back, but they outdistanced us to get back on their gun. They laid their bombs right across the the anti-tank defenders position. Royal Horse Artillery were defending us with ack guns. Took off unmolested. 3 Squadron in the meantime was heading its way back to its base. Squadron leader Jackson looked at his fuel in the Hurricane, discovered his needle was on empty, and he turned to come back and in time to see the bombs drop. By the time he landed back on the airstrip, we'd got back to our gun. I noticed that 3 bombs had gone off within a 9-yard radius of our weapon. Our ears would have sung if we'd been on it. We'd have been distinctly uncomfortable, and the gun next to ours, the gun layer was dead. His clothes were burning and his ammunition was out of light. And I gather the officer in charge was wounded. 2 others were wounded on the gun, just as Jackson landed and taxied by us. Jackson fueled up and went off. The other 2 pilots who made these claims, one was dead in a week and another one in 6 months. And Jackson was ultimately killed in a year's time over Port Moresby. So the 3 active participants of that squadron were dead in no time, just a few months.
These constant air cover sorties were done while airfields were continually moving back from the enemy advance. Some missions during dust storms, others at night. During the retreat, anything that couldn't be packed and moved or unserviceable had to be destroyed. At one stage, 48,000 rounds of .303 ammunition had to be sacrificed. To save an aircraft from being abandoned, Pete Turnbull took off in a Hurricane with a bullet-hole tire, stuffed with blankets and grass to harden it. These were old Hurricanes that 3 Squadron had inherited. Thomas Trimble explains.
Sometimes we didn't have much interception work. Usually what we tried to intercept was a German reconnaissance aeroplane that was just too high. The Hurricanes wouldn't go that high. And because these are the early Hurricanes, you know, the Battle of Britain ones, because we got aeroplanes that had been in the Battle of Britain that had flown for about 100 hours. They'd been sent out to Africa, they'd flown right across Africa, then up the Nile, and in fact, the Hurricane that was allotted to me had something like 120 hours out of it. Well, we reckoned that if they flew for 180 hours, they'd had it. But then Rommel came in and we kept going back as hard as we could. We were moving every day from landing ground to landing ground. You know, you'd start off in the morning at one landing ground. The troops would get you airborne, and you'd finish your patrol further back. You might get another patrol in, then you'd go a little bit further back. We're running out of parts for the aeroplanes, and we're losing them. We're losing the odd pilot.
During those first weeks of April 1941, Rommel's Africa Corps had driven most of the Allied forces right out of Cyrenaica back into Egypt, except for the English and Australian forces left isolated in Tobruk. The Australian 9th Division and the remnants of a British armoured division formed a 23,000-strong garrison at Tobruk, completely cut off from the rest of the Allied forces. They needed all the air support they could get, so on the 16th, 4 of 3 Squadron's Hurricanes landed inside the Tobruk perimeter and remained there to assist the besieged Australian troops defending the garrison. About that time, one Gruppe of the German Jagdgeschwader 27, consisting of 3 staffels of ex-Battle of Britain pilots, arrived at Amel Ghazala with their single-seater Messerschmitt Bf-109E fighters. One of those pilots was Oberfähnrich Hans Joachim Marseille, a young man destined to become one of Germany's top fighter pilots. Many 3 Squadron pilots were to fight against him and his Gruppe during the next 17 months. The Bf-109Es, arriving in steady numbers, were considered superior to the Hurricanes in speed, rate of climb and armament. Their Daimler-Benz inverted V12 engines gave them a 360 mile-per-hour speed at 20,000 feet, at least 50 miles per hour faster than the Hurricane. This was one of many reasons that influenced the Allied command to recall 3 Squadron to Akyr in Palestine on the 3rd of May for retraining and re-equipping with the relatively new American Curtiss P-40B Tomahawk. Powered by a 1,150 horsepower Allison engine, the Tomahawk's speed and performance was closer to that of the Bf-109. It was a fairly maneuverable machine which performed well at low altitudes and suited the desert conditions quite well. Flying Officer Bobby Gibbes, a 5-foot 4-inch, 25-year-old ex-salesman, had joined the squadron on the 14th of May 1941 and would go on to lead the squadron and become one of the top-scoring Australian pilots during the 2 years he would serve with 3 Squadron.
When we got the Tomahawks, the boys had been flying Hurricanes mainly, and the Hurricanes are a very forgiving aeroplane. You could be fairly rude to a Hurricane, it wouldn't bite you. But the Tomahawk, it was a different kettle of fish, and it would turn around and bite very smartly. And the boys damaged something like 24 Tomahawks learning to fly them at later. And I was one of the new boys, so I wasn't given a chance of going on a Tomahawk for quite a while. They let me fly an old Gauntlet for a while, but when the time came for me to go on, I had evidently been quite critical of these pilots branding these beautiful aeroplanes. And when the time came for me to go up, they all watched, and I heard later some of them said, "We hope that little bastard pranged us." but fortunately I didn't.
By the 8th of June 1941, 3 Squadron were ready to fly again, and operations recommenced in Syria against the Vichy French Armée d'Air, who flew older Morane fighters, some Glenn Martin bombers, and the more popular De Woitine D520 fighters. No. 3 Squadron's Tomahawks, flying from their temporary airfield at Jenin, brought down many of these nimble little French fighters during their patrols and during escort missions for Blenheim light bombers attacking enemy convoys on the Damascus-Beirut road.
In Syria, we were up against the Vichy French. They were normal French Air Force, but they had become on the Vichy side, and they were quite brave people. We got quite a few of them, of course. I think we shot down 23 airplanes in Syria before the show fell. I think I got one De Woitine. I shot at a couple, and shot at some Ju-88s, and which were over the fleet one day out of Haifa. We could have got the whole of all the 88s, except the Navy put up such a barrage that we had to go around, and some of them got away. But we got about 3 or 4 of them.
After the Blenheims dropped their bombs, the Tomahawk pilots guided them out of the area before returning to strafe the road, which the French called Nightmare Road, because of the intense, heavy, low-flying strikes the squadron made. By the 12th of July, the Vichy forces fighting in Syria had quit, and their signing of a truce marked the end of the squadron's Syrian campaign. Almost 1 year to the day since leaving Australia. The campaign had given the squadron's pilots the opportunity of strengthening their teamwork, while they were collectively destroying or damaging 31 enemy aircraft in that 5-week period. From the 13th of September until early November 1941, the squadron's 12 Tomahawks patrolled the Sidi Barrani and Mersa Matruh area, and along the coastline as far as Tobruk, where Allied forces had been hemmed in.
Well, we were doing patrols over the wire, and we couldn't get as far as Tobruk because we didn't have the range to do that. If we copped a fight, we wouldn't be able to get back. We weren't of much help to Tobruk boys for quite a long time, until the army advanced, and then we were able to help them a bit. But basically, by escorting bombers, bombing around the perimeter of Tobruk and so on, stopping the enemy forces. When we could get over Tobruk, it looked like a huge rabbit warren with all the burrowing that's gone on around it, and I think the Tobruk boys were always pleased when they saw our aeroplanes instead of the enemy aeroplanes. And one day we had a bit of a combat, and I splashed a Mackie 200, or forget now, might have been G50, and he went in just near Tobruk, and the Tobruk boys confirmed him for me, which I was very pleased about, because I didn't see him go in, but they did.
On one occasion, during a heavy dust storm, one Tomahawk exploded when Flying Officer Stratton slammed into an unmanned aircraft that an RAF pilot had stupidly left on the edge of the strip. Stratton's life was saved by Corporal Whittington, who soaked himself in firefighting foam and dragged the unconscious pilot from the flames. For this heroic act, Whittington was awarded the British Empire Medal. In early November 1941, 3 Squadron and 112 Squadron RAAF were paired up to form No.2 Wing, with Peter Jeffrey appointed as acting wing commander and newly promoted acting squadron leader, Alan Rawlinson, the replacement commanding officer for 3 Squadron. Their first move westward was to Madalena, and air combat in this new campaign commenced in mid-November 1941. The fighting was intense, and November 22nd became a black day in the squadron's history, when 5 pilots were killed and 2 taken prisoner after their Tomahawks had been shot down over the Bir Gobi and Bir Hachim regions. There had been several combats that day against the new Messerschmitt Bf-109Fs, and in some of these dogfights, there were up to 4 Bf-109Fs to a single Tomahawk, with one particular combat lasting for a record 1 hour and 5 minutes. Only dusk forced the enemy to withdraw, leaving the weary 3 Squadron pilots to limp home with landing lights on, some forced landing short of the strip, and others running out of petrol while taxiing in. At the end of November, the squadron had claimed 39 enemy aircraft destroyed or damaged in just a few flying days, bringing the squadron's tally of enemy aircraft destroyed to 106. The first of the desert squadrons to destroy 100 enemy aircraft, and the 3rd or 4th Empire Squadron to reach their 100 in the entire war.
3 and 112 Squadron had gone out as a wing, and we'd been attacked by 109s several times on the way out to the area that we were supposed to patrol. I'd seen 1 or 2 109s shot down, and then as we got close to Tobruk, we were attacked by, maybe about 20 odd 109s, and because we were following 112 Squadron, we weren't leading the wing that day. We unfortunately went into a turn with 112 Squadron. We thought they were just going to turn, but instead of that, they continued the turn and went into what is sometimes called a defensive circle. And naturally we were part of the wing, we went in with them, and we got stuck there, and we stayed in it for 63 minutes. And in that 63 minutes, I saw one fellow just a little bit up from me up here. He was hit by a 109, and he got out into his parachute, and I saw his parachute. By the time I'd gone round the circle again, I wasn't looking for him. And another chap who was just up in front of me and was rammed by a 109. The 109, the tactic of the 109s was to sit above us and then dive through us in pairs. And they'd shoot on their way down, you see. We were going round in a circle. And anyway, this bloke was hit by the 109, and as he was hit, half of one wing was sheared off, and the 109 just disintegrated into a shower of sparks, like a cone that was gradually expanding. And so in that time I saw this one fella shot down here and the one up there.
Thanks for watching part 1 of 3 Squadron in World War II. Be sure to tune into the next episode as we continue the story of 3 Squadron in the North African campaign.